You're listening to the Ontos Podcast, where we explore the nature of stories in the pursuit of being and truth. I'm Vaud.
And I'm Maq.
And our sentience depends on you. Now cue the intro music. Spoilers.
Rated S for spoilers.
Spoilers, leave, spoilers. Okay,
All
those
right.
of you who are still with us.
So we are going chapters 6 through 10.
We got some good ones.
Oh my gosh. So I'm not going to harp on this. I'm just going to mention it. I have a theory about, we had mentioned in the previous spoiler episode about the epigraphs, talking about how the very first couple epigraphs talked about ruin preservation and the synergy of harmony, being like, oh, that's literally how the era 1 ends. And I made a theory that this last epigraph, or the first epigraph in chapter 7, was talking about he will be discord and he
shall defend their ways, yet he shall violate them. He will be the savior, yet they will call him heretic. His name shall be Discord, yet they will love him for it.
His name shall be capital D Discord. And I said that what if Harmony gets splintered or becomes Discord, a new shard? And you can listen to my whole hissy fit in the other spoiler episode, so I'm not going to go into that now.
And you can listen to me try to bring him back down to Earth.
I literally just go on and
That's
on.
this planet, Earth?
Yeah, something like that. Planet Dirt. So we hear, we get to talking about Rashik. We get the hints of the Terrace Men and Ferrochemy.
Yeah, big time in this episode. We get to see, or big time in these chapters, we get to see the interaction and the introduction of Sazed, and we keep getting hinted at that Sazed has incredible powers, and I love how well Brandon hinted at it, because a big thing here is Kelsier had a little bit of a drop where he was just no man's going to fare well in a fight against an angry keeper. And then later on in this book, we get to see Sazed just knock a Steel Inquisitor completely out. And I'm like, oh man, what a nice little foreshadowing, just drip right there.
Let's talk about the other big Cosmere implication on this. The really, really big one, especially right now as we're going into talking about the 11th metal in the end of Era 2. Trell.
The Lost Metal, yeah.
Or the Lost Metal. Trell gets mentioned.
Trellogism, I think it is.
For the first time. And I believe it's been confirmed that, yes, this is somehow relevant to Trell in Era 2.
Okay. I'll take your word on that one.
There are a few big things, potential theories that go into here. So he talks about the religion. He talks about how Trell was the, god of 1,000 eyes. I would keep eyes on people, that they lived in where seasons would have, days and days of daylight and then days and days of nighttime, which makes sense for a northern, sphere.
Yeah.
Because that happens on Earth as well, where they're, in Alaska, they'll have, months where it's nighttime all the time. And so they were talking about how the jealous brother had the single eye who would come in and get rid of all the 1,000 eyes. And that was just the sun, essentially. Yeah. What's interesting, and this is not my own theory, it's something I thought about, but I'm not going to take credit for it, was that describes Taldane too. In White Sand.
Interesting.
Because they have day side and they have night side.
Mm-hmm.
And night side is, basically a constant dusk where you can see stars all the time, and day side is just that one bright sun.
Yep.
And some people have hinted that Trell could be autonomy. And autonomy is basically the shard for Taldane. And this sounds very familiar. And it's a possibility. I mean, this is the first time we hear about Trell. And
something that I noticed when he mentioned the 1,000 eyes, which are the stars and everything, when Harmony is talking to Wax. Okay, and again, this is a spoiler episode, get out. But when he's talking to Wax after Wax dies, and he's showing him like the view of Scadrial from space, essentially, and he shows him Trell, and he describes it as Trell as just this blanket of red over the sky, and it's just like,
admittedly, we don't know that's. I don't think he says it's Trell. He says it's something. There's something, and we assume it's Trell because
we are making the assumption it's Trell.
Like I mean, it could be proven not to be Trell. It'd be really weird, not consistent with the way it's written. But we say that's Trell, and you said it's blanketed in red.
Yeah, it's blanketed in red, and I'm just curious. Like, it looked like it was blanketing the sky. So, like, again, this religion with 1,000 eyes, is that where that came from? It's just like this overwhelming blanket of it. It's coming over Scadrial.
And again, we've seen that the small details can become big details later, and the things that you think are going to be dropped aren't dropped. And I'm interested to see on the further readouts, like how the other religions come out, because, Sazed used this, and then like in book 3 of Era 1, he says he uses Tragalism or Trellism to figure out where to move Scadrial because of their star charts, because they worship the stars.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the last time I think they mentioned Trell until Era 2.
I'm curious about that. Did maybe Sazed, Vin, everyone not see Trell or whatever Trell is because Scadrial wasn't in the right location? And so when he moved it back, that's when...
Ooh, I didn't think about that.
Because if they worshipped it, what if that's how it could die it out? Because... it was there, they could see it, or like, I don't know, like, I'm not saying it as in just like the red blanket, but Trell could be worshipped because it was in a certain place. And once Rashik moved it, Trell had no more influence. But then when Sazed was forced to move it back to restore balance, it put Scadrial back onto Trell's radar.
That's a very, very interesting possibility. And I'm super stoked to see it because the thing is all the Cosmere books, as far as I know, every single religion has been, how do I say this, right? Like, they've had some idea of what's actually happening in the universe. Like, they may have been off a little bit here and there. I mean, you would think, like, for example, let's go with later on, we get the Survivor. Okay, yes, he is the Survivor. Yes, he did come back to life as a Contra. And, yes, he did kind of lead to the death of the Lord Ruler.
Yeah, Brandon really latches on to like the real life idea of like mythos comes from exaggerated stories. Yeah, it comes from something and it eventually turns into something grand, but there's some truth in where it lies.
And I mean, in Era 2, we hear about, the Lord Ruler coming back. As far as we know, we don't know how that could have been possible. We think it's probably Kelsier.
The thing is, they refer to him as the Sovereign.
The Sovereign, yeah. And so, again, you think that these religions... Well, I'm saying these religions come from something, and this seemed to be like the breadcrumbs he drops. So I wonder, I'm trying to keep track of these religions as Sazed starts bringing them up.
And something, by the way, that's like, I want to say it's word of Brandon because I've never seen it anywhere in the books, but I read it somewhere that like the Lord Ruler, the Southern Scadrians, the people in Era 2 that they discover, the Lord Ruler just like did that as like a control group. Basically,
yeah, that's my understanding, is that he was almost worried, that he was going to screw humanity up too much. So he was like, let me put some regular people over here, and then I'll mess with these other ones. Because that's when the Ska, they are different.
Yeah, and they adapted to how hot everything was. And then when everything was moved back, which, by the way, big mess up, says, like, when everything was moved back, he didn't help them at all.
He made like this Eden for everyone else. And yeah, so...
Do you think he like made it and then looked on the back end and went, oops?
I don't know. I'm sure. Hopefully, we'll get some more insight for that.
What's cool about that, though, is when Harmony is talking about how he helped them too much, he's probably looking at these Southern Scadrians and like, I didn't help them worth their crap, and look, they have flying ships.
yeah, and that's. I mean, later on we hear about Odium. He starts talking about like basically a war between worlds and how he's building up a military to be able to fight that. I mean, we got some really interesting things coming down the pipeline, but we're getting way off track.
Yeah, so let's go back to some more spoiler stuff in our chapters. Like chapter 7 had one that was kind of interesting to me. Let me pull it up here, make sure I'm talking about it right. we have Reen's voice where she once again mentions Reen's voice being stronger around Kelsier. And I'm wondering about that because it always says things along the lines of like, you can't trust, you can't trust, you can't trust. But we know, based on the short story, The 11th Metal, and just in general, Secret History, that Ruin didn't have direct control over Kelsier, but he influenced basically everything he did. And so I'm wondering, is the voice, even though it's telling her not to trust and everything, is that voice there because Ruin's trying to encourage her to work with Kelsier? Because his ultimate goal is to get rid of the Lord Ruler at this point, because the Lord Ruler is the one who knows what Ruin is.
I don't know. It could just be that Ruin has in his mind to destroy relationships. I can't recall, and maybe when we bring up later, we'll be able to understand what his direct influence on Vin was pre-Well of Ascension.
Yeah, because
it just seemed like he was just being kind of a dick.
Because Ruin, through Gimel, that's his name, I can't remember the other Ska Mistborn, introduced the 11th metal, which was what was it again? It was
Malatium.
Is that it?
Yeah, it's gold and atium. It's an alloy of atium. Yeah,
essentially
you can see in time for someone else.
Yeah, their past life, right? And he did that on purpose because he needed them to figure out that Rashik was a ferochemist. And when Vin figured that out, that's how she was able to kill Rashik, because she was able to pull his armbands off, which basically caused him to fade into nothing because he was compounding life, essentially. Right. And so I'm just curious about that, because it's like every time she's talking, it would seem so weird, right? That if Ruin wanted them to be able to defeat, like maybe he was trying to pull Vin away because Vin could have changed Kelsier for the better, and so he was trying to keep Kelsier on the track, and then it just ended up being that Vin was the one to fulfill everything and not Kelsier.
Maybe. I mean, I don't see Ruin as being super clever.
I mean, he was pretty clever, though.
He was.
In the series. Like, he changed their writings and everything. He wasn't maybe as subtle. Yeah. But he was clever, nonetheless.
Well, I mean, having the perspective of essentially a god helps with that.
What was it? Sazed with, like, the sick diss, where he's basically just like, we need to be scared of Odium because of how like whoever's controlling the shard is what makes it dangerous, and he's just having the subtle diss on Ruin over here.
Yeah. Because because AT was described as apparently like really like a good, conscious good man.
He just like
he got corrupted, by Ruin.
The Mist are your friend, Vin. They hide you. They're your friend. Mm-hmm. You feel so good in the Mist.
Right.
It's because preservation chose you from the beginning.
Right. So, her being this vessel with preservation. We also saw earlier, like when she used Allomancy, I think a few chapters ago, where the Mist started playing around her when she used Allomancy.
Okay.
It's mentioned very briefly. It's like a quick one-liner, and then it goes away.
Well, Brandon's good at those quick one-liners.
One thing I can't recall is the Mist Wraiths. Kelsier alludes to the noblemen have other use for the Mist Wraiths.
I think it's just to keep the Skull scared.
Yeah, or
none of them.
I'm sure he's not talking about the Khandra.
No, so he's not, because no one knows that the Mist Wraiths are Khandras. That's a closely hidden secret that I think we find out in book 2. I think it's 3, because that's when we get to talk to Tunsun, or we get his view a lot more. But I don't think the noblemen know that Mist Wraiths become Khandras at all.
My other theory is, at some point, do we find out that they feed corpses to Mist Wraiths to hide the bodies?
I don't remember that if that's the case.
That would make sense too, I guess, because there's like that one movie where he feeds them to pigs or something. I don't know.
That would make sense. It would definitely make sense. But I think it's cool how even up to this point, it's like learning that Mist Wraiths were. I mean, it's kind of a sad thing to realize, but it's cool nonetheless that we learned that Mist Wraiths are the original
Ferochemist.
Yeah,
his friends.
Rashik's original friends.
Yeah, that's a tragic thing. More tragedy in the Mistborn. This is one of those things that Brandon does really well, where he has really, really horrific things, but he kind of like doesn't play on them very much. Then when you think about him,
he just doesn't.
Wow.
I think some people would say he doesn't like romanticize them.
Yeah.
He says a matter of a fact. This is a terrible thing, and it's a matter of a fact.
Yeah, and it's like, this is horrifying, but I'm not gonna like focus on it. And you could just think like, oh yeah, that in and of itself is pretty horrifying.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's like a kind of like a philosophy on his part where it's just like you can't, especially for like he wants to write these books obviously that younger audiences can see too, but and that's a time that is something that is just open discussion and way off our topic, but it's like at what point do you want to tell younger people that these are horrific things that happen, but you don't want to like expose them to the terrible details of it completely?
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of those things. I'm like, these books do take on to pretty big, major, heavy topics, but you don't feel like it just because he doesn't focus on them. Like this is not the point. Like this is bad things, but this is not the point. Let's move on. The other things that came up here I thought was funny. I never realized Marsh was called Iron Eyes before Era 2.
Brandon once again telling you exactly what's going to happen.
And it's funny because he even says, oh, well, we're not going to call him Iron Eyes because that associates him too much with the Steel Inquisitor.
End of book 1 is knocking.
I know that's really kind of funny. And then I also missed this subplot when I first read it when he becomes a Steel Inquisitor. So this is actually something I've been really trying to pay attention to.
Oh yeah, you missed his whole infiltration process.
Yeah, because I remember it being like, wow, that's super convenient. One of your guys became one of the most powerful, one of the most influential people that only a few people can ever be in the whole like system. I mean, it's basically like, hey, I'm going to try to be this low-level office worker and be like, you now lead the FBI. And so, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm going to be following this a little bit closer now.
I mean, yeah, and we'll talk about it more when we get there, but I was thrown off because I really just thought Marsh was going to be there to die off so Kelsier, like, snaps. And that's kind of what Brandon plays at, right? Like, we end up finding the scene of where he thinks Marsh died, but where in reality we learned it's the scene where Marsh was turned into a Steel Inquisitor. But yeah, no, I love how Brandon is just like, I'm going to tell you how the book ends in the first epigraph. Here, I'm going to tell you exactly how this story ends for Marsh.
And I just remember in Era 2 when they mentioned Iron Eyes, I was like, they must be talking about Marsh because he's probably the only Steel Inquisitor there. But I never even thought that was his nickname.
Yeah.
I didn't even remember that.
Old Iron Eyes as death, apparently.
Yeah, and so again, just a funny little detail that is cool to remember now. That you're like, oh, I'm like that meme, the Leonardo DiCaprio meme.
Yeah, just pointing. Yeah, and again, Brandon here, like giving himself a little bit of a nod, his own pat on the back, with Vin being like, I guess like the water breaks down the ash here, and all of us actually realizing, the people who have read through and finished everything, that was something Rashik actually thought of. Everything breaks down the ash.
Yeah, and I think that's
why the plants are brown.
Oh, yeah, the plants are brown. And again, I feel like a dingus.
I think it's because it eats them up. Right?
The last episode, I was like, it was so subtle, it wasn't played up on, and he's like, I am going to tell you that green things are weird. Again, something that, as someone who had aspired to be a writer at one point, I would have dropped that and heavily hit that so early on so that you could imagine things early on. But he's just kind of like, I'm going to drop it here a little bit and I'm going to remind you about it. I'm going to drop it here a little bit. So, okay, there you go. So he definitely explicitly pointed out like green plants are weird. Aspen trees, I did look it up. Like they are the way they are. I found it interesting that they have aspens and that noblemen that use those as decoration, I guess. I don't know if there's something about aspens that are like specifically like biologically set up that might make them, more prone to survive in something like this, but just a little interesting detail.
Well, yeah, and according to what we learned later through Sazed as Harmony, is like Rashik like basically changed the biology of all plants to survive and break down the ash.
Yeah. I just thought it was funny that the aspens were what they brought up. Maybe we'll pay attention to that and see if it becomes more relevant sometime later. But yeah, it's just super interesting to kind of catch these like little things that become big things later and be reminded of like, okay, yes, I do not do good. Clearly listening at 1.7 speed will make me miss some things and kind of blow by other things.
So you know what I'm curious about? When Vin's fighting Kelsier, do we know if she's wearing her earring? Because she's not wearing her earring, right?
So my understanding, or it sounds like, she's constantly wearing her earring, and here's my reason why. Because in the previous chapters we talked about how she had only a few possessions that she actually like carried with her all the time. This earring, and like some pebbles and just like some other stuff. So this earring is like basically the only thing she's actually carrying with her. There's only like one thing, that she's holding on. And the only way that she'd be able to make sure that it's safe, someone as paranoid as her, is to keep it on herself, essentially all the time.
Yeah, the only reason I ask here is because we get the scene where she's fighting with Kelsier, and Kelsier's like, she's super duper strong. And obviously that's meant to hint at the fact that she comes from a high Pralin, which means it's a lot more pure bloodline, essentially, for Allomancy. But I'm wondering, like at the end of book 1, where he hints that she's able to use the mist for her Allomancy, right? And that's because she doesn't have her earring in at the end of book 1, and she's able to pull a little bit of Preservation's power in. And that's how she's able to pull the bands with Lord Ruler. Is this one of those moments where she like just fights so often with the earring in that she's limiting her power, and every time she ends up happening to fight without it, and we see her do something spectacular, is that just something Brandon's doing for consistency for himself? Or am I just like shooting in the dark here?
You might be true. I mean, this is we obviously on the second read through we're paying really close to zero.
Very close attention.
My hint is that she says this voice has been louder ever since Kelsier's been around, which is a red herring, I think, because I think the voice is again Ruin.
Yeah.
Because she has the earring in.
It's always Ruin. Yeah.
And that implies that she probably is wearing it all the time. Now, they don't mention it. Like when she's cutting her hair, you would think that they might be like, oh, this earring's kind of getting in the way or whatever. And she might be hesitant to take it out. I think it actually even mentions later in like Secret History that there's one point where Ruin like starts implanting in her mind that she needs to keep the earring in because she gets like obsessed with holding onto it and keeping it in her ear. We're not at that point. So this is again at that point where I'm like, I think Ruin is just kind of being a ween, and just trying to ruin her life by being this way. I don't think he actually has a plan for her yet. I think that happens later.
I think
when Preservation gives her all that power or whatever.
So it's from the very beginning that Preservation chose her. So we know that in Secret History. Preservation chose her since she was born, and Ruin knew it was her since she was born, and that's why he spiked her early. But I think you're right. I don't think he has an active plan for her. He's more so just trying to make her
isolated.
So terrible, essentially, that she never aspires to be what she could be.
And when she has her hemalurgic spike, her whole thing is supposed to be that like she's an extra good seeker. Like she can pierce copper clouds, and that's
again awesome sudden drop.
I know that's so cool. And so the steel pushing, I think that's just supposed to allude to the fact that she is a pure Mistborn, which
pure line, not pure Mistborn, but she has a pure line.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It is explicitly stated in the third book that the early Mistborns were way more powerful, and that's why Elend comes out and he just becomes a beast overnight because he has the Lorasium from the beginning.
Yeah, which by the way, fun thing, a little off topic, but something I learned myself. Lorasium, like I read somewhere that if it's made into a spike, Lorasium can steal all abilities as a hemalurgic spike. And so I'm just trying to think about that for Era 2. I wonder if Lorasium is like the lost metal, or is it like which lost metal are we thinking about here?
The implication is that it's probably Trellium, because Trellium is a thing. It's actually the thing that Palm used.
Harmony has his own god metal, and that's
which we think is at metal, maybe at metal.
So no. The metal that the Southern Scadrians use
at metal.
At metal. Sorry, I thought you said that metal. I was like, I don't know what you mean by that.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
At metal, yeah, that is Harmony's metal 100%.
Which makes sense because it explodes whenever it comes into liquid, just like sodium would. So you can't ingest it, which Harmony would probably be all about. My metal can't be used, essentially. So you can't use it as a hemalurgic spike because it would explode, and you can't use it as a Mistborn or whatever, or a Misting. So that makes some sense, but again, bit more off topic. We keep trying to go into other eras because we're just inching our way through here. But Yeah, we're starting to get the seeds sown for the things that are going to happen later in the books. I thought that was super interesting, and we'll keep trying to pay attention and keep an eye on that earring.
Hey guys, Vaud here. Thanks for listening to the Ontos podcast. You'll start to see regularly scheduled episodes starting November 14th, 2022. And if you'd really like to follow us, please consider subscribing. We're a very small project, so please support us with likes and comments, because that's what the algorithm craves. If you're listening on the YouTube channel, please hit the notification bell. And if you want to really give us a boost, consider supporting us on Patreon, because I really need to better my hair.